The clock showed 10 p.m. when I finally finished cleaning the kitchen. My back hurt. My feet were begging for a break, and all I could think about was the pile of clothes waiting to be ironed. Welcome to my life. My name is Amber. I'm 20, and apparently I was born to be my own family's unpaid housekeeper. While I put away the last plate, I hear my brother Brandon laughing from the living room. He's been playing video games for hours with soda cans and snack packets scattered all around him. My sister Zoe is locked in her room, probably creating content for her social media. Neither of them has ever lifted a finger to help around the house. Subscribe to the channel and give a thumbs up to see more stories like this. Amber, are you done there? Your dad's bedding needs to be changed today. My mom's voice echoes down the hall. I take a deep breath before answering. I'm on it, Mom. It's always like this. I wake up at 5:30 a.m. Is make breakfast for everyone, work full-time at a mall store, come home and start my second shift. Washing, ironing, cooking, cleaning. Meanwhile, Brandon and Zoe act like they have their own personal assistants. The most frustrating part? My parents' behavior. For me, it's strict rules, constant demands, and zero tolerance. You're an adult now. You need to be responsible, my mom tells me when I complain. But for my siblings? Total freedom. Last week, I asked Brandon to at least put his plate in the sink after eating. Relax, Amber. It's not like you've got anything better to do, he replied, not even taking his eyes off the TV. My mom, hearing it all from the couch, just laughed. Leave your brother alone. He needs to focus on his studies if he wants to get into a good college. And me? I too dreamed of going to college. But between my job and household responsibilities, I can barely breathe. Last Thursday, work was especially exhausting. We had an inventory at the store, which meant staying late counting merchandise. I got home at 8 p.m., dead tired and starving. The scene I walked into looked like something out of a disaster movie. The sink overflowing with dirty dishes, food scraps scattered across the counter, and a huge tomato sauce stain on the kitchen floor. Brandon's handiwork, of course, since he decided to make nachos for the friends who came over to watch the game. Tears of frustration welled up as I stared at the mess. All I wanted was a hot shower and some sleep. You're finally home, said my mom as she walked into the kitchen. Brandon made a little mess here. I need you to clean it up before bed. That was the moment. Something inside me just cracked. A little mess? This looks like a war zone. Why doesn't he clean up? Why is it always me? My mom looked at me like I'd just spoken in another language. What's gotten into you? Brandon had a long day with school and basketball practice. He needs to rest. And I? I had a long day too. I work. I deserve to rest too. Don't be selfish, Amber. Family helps each other. Helps? Who in this house has ever washed one of my socks? Who's made my coffee when I'm running late? Who's even asked how my day was? The argument escalated quickly. My dad showed up, demanding that I lower my voice and respect Mom. Brandon watched from the doorway with an ironic smile that only made me angrier. I'm tired. I can't take being treated like a servant in this house anymore. If you're not happy with the rules, the door's open, my dad shot back. At that moment, something changed inside me. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. You know what? You're right. I went upstairs to my room, grabbed a suitcase, and started stuffing clothes and personal items into it. My mom followed me, alternating between threats and pleading, but my decision was made. In less than 30 minutes, I was out on the street with a suitcase, my purse, and a strange mix of fear and relief. I had no idea where to go, but I knew I couldn't spend another night in that house. I called my friend Lena, who kindly offered me her couch for a few days. During that time, I scoured rental ads until I found a tiny studio that fit my tight budget. It was small, with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and just enough room for a bed and a wardrobe. But it was mine. For the first time ever, I had a space that I didn't share, rules that I set myself, and most importantly, no one expecting me to clean up after them. The first week in my apartment was a mix of euphoria and anxiety. I woke up every day with this strange feeling of quiet. No one shouting at me to make breakfast. No endless list of chores waiting. Freedom had a sweet taste I'd never experienced before. But on the 8th day, the messages started. The first was from my mom. "Hope you're happy with your selfish attitude. Your brother had to wash his own dishes yesterday." I laughed to myself reading that. Brandon washing dishes? I could almost picture the drama it must have been. I didn't reply. A few hours later, another message came. "Your dad is very disappointed in you. A daughter doesn't just abandon the family like that." That message stung a bit more. I've always cared about my dad's opinion, even when he was unfair to me. I resisted the urge to explain and stayed silent. The next day, Zoe messaged, "The house is a mess. Mom is making us clean everything. It's awful. When are you coming back?" Later that night, my phone rang. It was my mom. I hesitated but answered. "Amber, this has gone too far. You made your point. Now it's time to come home." "I'm not trying to prove anything, Mom. I'm just living my life. Living your life in a tiny apartment, abandoning your family when we need you. Need me or the free maid I used to be?" Silence from the other end. "That's really ungrateful of you," she finally replied, her voice trembling between anger and indignation. "After everything we did for you, we gave you a roof, food, clothes. Just the basics that parents are supposed to give their kids, Mom. It's not a favor. You're going to regret this, Amber. One day you'll need us. Maybe. But right now I need space." I hung up and temporarily blocked her number. I needed some peace to process everything that was happening. In the days that followed, the calls and messages intensified. Brandon sent me a voice note complaining that now he had to clean his own room. My dad sent a short message saying that I was breaking my mom's heart. Even my Aunt Diane, who barely talked to me, called to say that family is all we have in this life. It was as if suddenly everyone had woken up to my existence. Not because they missed me, but because they missed what I used to do for them. In the second week, their tactics changed. My mom showed up at my work with a basket of cookies, my favorites. She smiled as if nothing had happened and invited me over for dinner at home. "Just to talk, honey. We miss you." I agreed to go, thinking that maybe it was a chance for an honest conversation. What a mistake. Barely had I set foot in the house when I realized it was a trap. The kitchen was a disaster. Piles of dirty laundry in the corners, and the entire house reeked of deliberate neglect. My mom smiled in an almost triumphant way. "See how much we need you? No one can keep this house as clean as you do." I felt my stomach sink. This wasn't an invitation to reconcile. It was an attempt to guilt-trip me back into my role as the maid. "Mom, I came to talk, not to clean. We can talk while you help out a little. You've always been good at multitasking." I looked at her, then at the mess, and an absolute clarity hit me. They weren't ready to change, to acknowledge the imbalance, or to see me as anything other than a service provider. I think it was a mistake coming here today. When I turned to leave, she grabbed my arm. "Amber, you can't just abandon your responsibilities. What did you think would happen? That we'd applaud your rebellion?" "No, Mom. I thought that maybe, just maybe, you'd realize how much you've exploited me all these years." Right then, Brandon showed up in the living room, tossing yet another dirty cup onto the already cluttered coffee table. "Hey, little sis is back. Great. Now my room needs to be tidied up." I stared at my brother, then my mom, looking for any hint that they understood the situation. Nothing. "You really don't get it, do you? I'm not on strike. I'm not throwing a tantrum. I'm setting boundaries. I'm choosing to respect myself because you never did." "What a drama," Brandon scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Stop calling me. Stop sending me manipulative messages. Stop showing up at my work. When you're ready to treat me like an equal member of this family, with the same rights and responsibilities as everyone else, maybe we can build a new relationship." My mom was stunned, as if I just announced I was joining a cult. "And you think you'll manage on your own? Without our help, without our support?" "I'm getting along just fine, thanks." "And what help, Mom? What support? Being exploited isn't support." I left that house feeling lighter, as if I'd finally allowed myself to fully exist. The following weeks were quiet. Apparently my family had given up on getting me back, at least for now. I dove into my new routine: work, taking care of my little apartment, and more importantly, discovering who I was beyond their expectations. I started reading more, something I'd always loved but never had time for. I made friends with my neighbors. I even signed up for an online business course. Finally, that dream of college was starting to take shape. A week and a half later, I got a message from my dad. "Your mom isn't well, Amber. I think you should come over." Instant panic was followed by suspicion. Was this just another tactic? I called him directly, a rarity in our relationship. "Dad, what happened with Mom?" His tone was gloomy but evasive. "She's really stressed. The house, things aren't easy without you." "Is she sick, in the hospital?" "No, but she's really down. Please come over." Reluctantly, I agreed to stop by on Sunday. I spent the whole week psyching myself up, determined not to fall into emotional manipulations again. When I arrived, the house was in order. Not perfectly clean like it was when I lived there, but definitely not the chaos they'd tried to show me before. My mom was in the kitchen, looking all right, preparing lunch. "Amber, so good you're here." Her tone was different, less bossy, more tentative. My dad showed up, followed by Brandon and Zoe, each with awkward expressions. It felt like an intervention, but I was the only one who didn't know why. We sat down at the table, an odd silence hanging over us. Finally, my dad cleared his throat. "Amber, we have talked as a family over the past few weeks, and we realized that maybe we were unfair to you." I raised my eyebrows, too surprised to respond. "Your leaving forced us to rework the house, and it was challenging," he went on. My mom jumped in. "What your dad's trying to say is that we never realized how much work you did here, how much we depended on you." "That's not fair," Zoe mumbled surprisingly. "We never had to do anything, and you did it all." Brandon kept his eyes fixed on the table, clearly uncomfortable, but he gave a small nod. "We've set up a chore schedule," my dad explained. "Everyone contributes now, including your mom and me." I looked around, trying to process what was happening. It was the recognition I'd longed for, something I never really expected to receive. "We want you to come back home, Amber," my mom said, reaching her hand across the table. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to believe that things would be different now, that I'd finally be treated with fairness and respect. But another part, the part that had grown and strengthened over my weeks of independence, already knew the answer. "Thank you for saying that. Really, it means a lot to know that you finally understand. But I'm not coming back." Their faces ranged from shock to confusion. "But we fixed everything. We're splitting the chores now," protested my mom. And I'm glad for that. It should have been like that from the start. But what I learned living on my own goes way beyond household tasks. I learned to respect myself, to recognize when I'm being manipulated, to set boundaries. I built a space that is mine, where I feel safe and valued. "But we're your family," insisted my dad. "Yes, and I want you in my life, but as an independent adult who visits the family, not as the daughter who exists only to serve." Brandon, who rarely weighed in on serious matters, finally said, "Makes sense. You deserve your space. I guess we were kind of jerks to you." I nearly fell off my chair. An apology, even if indirectly, from Brandon? "More than kind of," Zoe corrected with a half smile. My mom looked as if she was about to argue further, but my dad placed his hand on hers. "We respect your decision, Amber. Our door will always be open whenever you want to visit." Lunch passed in a strange, but not entirely uncomfortable atmosphere. It was like we were all getting to know each other again on new terms. When I said goodbye, my mom hugged me tight. "I miss you," she whispered. "I miss you too, Mom. Maybe we can do more lunches on Sundays, and no expectations that I have to wash the dishes afterwards." She laughed, a trembling sound mixed with a resigned sigh. Deal. That night I went back to my apartment with a sense of closure. It wasn't a perfect ending. Family dynamics rarely are. But it was a new beginning, on fairer and healthier terms. In the weeks that followed, I kept in touch with my family. Our conversations were sometimes awkward and other times unexpectedly open. Brandon called to ask how to use the washing machine. Zoe invited me to watch her videos before she posted them. My mom sent texts asking really about my day, truly asking. not just as a guise for another chore request. Small steps, but significant. As for me, I discovered that there's a huge difference between taking care of a house because you're forced to, and taking care of it because it's your space, your refuge. I keep my apartment tidy not out of duty, but because it's an extension of the self-respect I've learned to have for myself. Yesterday marked 6 months of living on my own. I celebrated by cooking dinner for a few friends, including Brandon and Zoe, who came without our parents. As we talked and laughed in my small living room, I realized I'd achieved something that once seemed impossible. Not only physical independence from my parents' house, but also emotional independence. "You seem different," Zoe commented while helping me serve dessert, help she offered of her own accord. "Different how?" "I don't know. Lighter. More like you." I smiled because she was right. I was more myself than I'd ever been. Free from disproportionate expectations, unfair comparisons, and that constant feeling of being exploited. Subscribe to the channel and give a thumbs up to see more stories like this. The road wasn't easy. There were nights when I cried from missing them, moments when I doubted my decision, days when loneliness weighed heavier than freedom. But every time I cleaned my own bathroom without resentment, every time I got home and found everything just the way I'd left it, every single moment when I was simply existing without constant demands, I knew I'd made the right choice. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed, if I had continued accepting that unequal treatment, that toxic dynamic where my worth was tied directly to how useful I was around the house. I probably would have become increasingly bitter, more and more exhausted until something inside me just dried up. Instead, I'm thriving. I got promoted at work. I'm saving up so I can finally start college next semester. I have time for hobbies, for friends, for just being me. And what about my family? We're rebuilding a new kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect, not exploitation. It's not perfect, sometimes awkward, and often challenging. My mom still occasionally lets slip comments about how I abandoned the family. My dad sometimes acts like my independence is just a rebellious phase I'll eventually outgrow. But there are genuine moments of growth too, like when Brandon called to apologize for something he said years ago that deeply hurt me, or when my mom admitted, in a rare, vulnerable moment, that maybe she piled too many responsibilities on me because her own mom did the same to her. Breaking cycles isn't easy. Setting limits with people who've never had to respect them before is an ongoing effort. But the freedom that comes afterward, the feeling of finally being able to take a deep breath, of living fully in your own space, of being valued for who you are and not just for what you do for others, that's priceless. Today, when I look back on that night when I left the house with just a suitcase, I see it for what it was. The bravest and most loving act I ever did for myself. It wasn't rebellion or ingratitude, as my family first thought. It was self-preservation. It was saying I matter too. My time matters, my dreams matter, my rest matters. And maybe, just maybe, by setting these limits, I'm not just helping myself, but also helping my family grow. Because now Brandon and Zoe are learning skills they'll need as adults. Because my parents are being forced to examine the harmful patterns they've perpetuated for years. I don't know what the future holds for our family relationship, but I do know that whatever path I take, I'll walk it as a whole person, not as an extension of everyone else's needs. And that, in itself, makes all the difference in the world. Subscribe to the channel and give a thumbs up to see more stories like this.